Hi, I'm Jo from Skippy Quilting, and today's tutorial is all about putting that binding on your quilt. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and give us a thumbs up, that would be great. So let's get to it. Right, so here we are at the cutting table, and I've given it a press so that it is nice and flat. I've obviously got my cutting mats underneath because I don't want to cut the top of the unit. So I do have a really big ruler here with a handle on, and what I will do is I will put the links below so that if you want to go and purchase them, then you can, because these big rulers are really handy for this sort of job. And also I've got my trusty rotary cutter. So when you're squaring up, this is how I do it. Other quilters may do it differently, but I'm just going to show you how I do it. We'll put the ruler onto that seam there between the border and the main body of the quilt, and that should be 3 inches. Yeah, 1, 2, 3. And put that on that line all the way down. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. And there you go. So there's just a smidgen on this one, just a smidgen just to cut off there. So we'll cut that off. And we'll bring this over and do the next bit. That's 3 inches. 3 inches there on that seam. And I'll just do this last bit. Right. I just want to make sure I've got that in the right place. That's it. There you go. So that's nice, and you can see that that corner is now nice and square. When you're quilting, I usually find that the corners you can probably see it on this one, it's just slightly bowing out to the right there. So yeah, when we've squared it up, no problem. So I'll carry on all the way around, cutting at 3 inches, and I'll see you at the other end. Right, so here we are back at the cutting table. This is my fabric that I'm going to use for the binding. I actually like to use dark colours on bindings because I just think it frames the quilt really nicely. So this is a piece that I bought off the bolt. So the fold is this end of the fabric here. The selvages are up that end. And that's how I always cut my bindings. I don't turn the fabric around to try and make a longer piece of binding. I always use this method because it works for me. So we're actually going to cut our binding strips into 2.5 inches. But the first thing we need to do is we just need to tidy this edge up here. So we will cut that. And now I'm going to be cutting my strips into 2.5 inches, and I know for this particular quilt that I need 5 lengths for the binding, so I'll do that now. Another useful tip is count twice, cut once. So that's my 5 lengths of fabric all cut. Now I'm going to take you to the sewing machine now to show you how to join them together. Right, so here we are at the sewing machine, and I've got my thread in my machine, the coordinating thread. I'm going to just be using black. Highly recommend that you use a quality thread. I've tried to use cheap threads and wonder why I keep getting nesting at the back and missed stitches. Yeah, so I'd highly recommend a quality thread. I'm actually using Orifil, which is really great for quilting, but you know, there's Rassant, Gutermann, and there's a lot of other good brands out there on the market. So, right, we're going to be joining our binding. So if you get your first 2 lengths of binding, open them up, and then what we're going to be doing is we're actually going to be creating a diagonal seam from, I hope you can see it, from there to there, and we'll be sewing across there. And the reason that we sew across there on a diagonal is it reduces a lot of bulk in the seam, and it lays nice and flat. So I always pin. I think I've said before, I am a bit of a pinner, so I'll pin those 2 together. Now some people do like to use a bit of chalk and just draw the diagonal line to follow, but I've done it so many times, I'm happy to do it. I'm happy to eyeball it. So I'll put it to my machine, just a normal standard length stitch, and what we're going to be sewing is from that very corner there to that very corner there. Foot down and put some locking stitches before you start, and do a few back stitches when you finish, just to stop it unraveling. And there you have it. See that? The light's behind it there. So that's your seam. So we'll now go ahead and sew all of those strips together, and then I'll come back to you. That's all 5 strips sewn together, and as a habit I do make sure that the right sides are all on that right side, because sometimes I have sewn them the wrong way around. So yeah, they're all good. So now we're just going to trim off. These this excess here. So I've got my little embroidery scissors. So I'll cut. Leave a generous 1/4 inch. That's what I would suggest. So cut that off, and just cut that bit off there. Level that off. And that bit there, and then do that on all of those seams. Right, so we've done that. Now we're ready to take it to the pressing table, and we'll press these seams open, and we'll also just give the whole length of binding a quick press. Right, so here we are at the pressing station after trimming off our seams. So what we're going to do is we're just going to press these seams open, and so that they're nice and flat. done, what we're going to do is we're going to be folding this binding right in half, and we're going to press it together like that. And here, as we're pressing this in half, you'll see what I meant by the fact that all this extra fabric here is going to be spread along those couple of inches, so it does stop a lot of bulk, and I actually think it looks really professional. So there you go. Right, so that's my binding prepared or prepped. So I'll see you back at the sewing machine. Right, so here we are at the sewing machine. For today's exercise, I'm going to be putting the binding on the back first and then flipping it over to the front. Raw edges together, and I use these a lot, these wonder clips. So that beginning bit there, I'll put a wonder clip there, and then about 10 or 12 inches further on, I'll put another clip, because we're not actually going to start sewing until about this point here. And the reason is we do need to join the two ends of the binding up, so we do need to give ourselves a little bit of a tail to be able to do that. Right, so I'm going to stitch from here. So my needle is there, and I'm not sure if you can see it on camera, but on this particular walking foot, I have got my walking foot on it because there's multiple layers. There's a point there, and I know that is 1/4 of an inch, so I'm going to sew 1/4 of an inch down. So I'll start here, and off we go. What I like to do is I like to clip all of those layers together, and then as I'm working down, I just move it down just to keep it all nice and tidy and close together. It's just easier for me. Forgot my gloves. I'd still like to use at least one glove on this one. There we go. Right, so as we're approaching the corner, we need to just sew to 1/4 of an inch from the edge. Just roughly. I'll do it by eye, then I'll back stitch to secure that. There we go. What we do now is we take that out of the machine. So what we're going to be doing now is we're going to be creating our mitered corner. So what you need to do is you get your binding, you put, this is how I do it, you put the edge of your binding against the edge of the quilt, finger press that down, so that's your mitre there, and then you flip that over and you square that up there, and then I use one of these wonder clips just to secure that in place on that corner there so it doesn't move, and then I'll turn it all around, and then you start sewing once again 1/4 of an inch down and in line with that stitch in there. And there we go, we're off again, down to the next corner. So once again, we're at that corner, so until roughly a quarter of an inch from the edge, back stitch to secure your stitches, cut that off, take it out, put your binding flush with the bottom of the quilt. I hope you can see that there. Just creating that mitre there, and then you fold it back on itself so it's like a nice right angle. Secure that with a clip. And then start sewing once again. At a quarter of an inch in. There or thereabouts. I mean, you can measure if you want to be perfect, but yeah, that's more or less in line with that stitch in there, so I'm happy with that. And off you go again to the next corner. So when you're on that home stretch and you're ready to meet the end of the binding, give yourself again about another 10-12 inches. Actually, I might just sew another couple of inches down on that one, and then reverse stitch, and there we go. So you've got two loose ends here, that one at the end and this one at the beginning. So I'll take these clips off. I'll now show you how to put the ends together. Right, so to put the ends together, what you need to do is this part here that we started with, I've put that neatly along that edge of the quilt there, and then this will need to go neatly along that edge there. And what you need to do is, because the fabric is actually 2.5 inches wide, we need to cut an extra 2.5 inches on this long side here, just so that they overlap by 2.5 inches. It doesn't matter which way, but 2.5, so that's roughly there. So I'll cut that off there. So you can see there that that's 2.5 inches. Now this next part of the process, it can be a little bit frustrating and fiddly. I've done it a lot of times and I can still get it wrong. So we're going to join them so that it's got that diagonal seam across it, so that it's not a bulky seam. So we open up, this is how I do it. I open up the left hand side, the beginning of the binding, and then this one you need to open it up but turn it over so that the right sides would be together, and then we're going to actually just pin that in place like that. Try and make sure it's nice and square. And what we're going to do, we're just going to sew on that diagonal again as we did when we were joining the strips together. So we'll do that. If your quilt is getting in the way, you can use a couple of pins or clips just to clip it together and get that bulk out of the way. Hope you can see there on camera. So I'm going to be going from that point there to that point there. Secure your stitches either end of that sewing seam. You can also draw a line if you want to guide, but I'm just going to eyeball it. Back stitch. And hopefully, hey ho, I've done it right. Yep. So before we're obviously going to be cutting this bulk off here, off this seam, but before you cut it, make sure that you have sewn it on the right side, which we have done. Oh joy. So now we'll cut that off there as we did when we put the binding together. Just cut that off there, neaten those edges up like that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to the pressing station. I'm going to press that seam open, and then I'll just repress that so it's nice and flat. So I'll be back shortly. Right, so you can see that I've pressed that seam open and then pressed it nice and flat, so it goes perfectly along there. Now just to finish sewing this side of the binding, I'll actually always pin this bit. I'll start from the middle and then just put a pin every couple of inches, because what we don't want to do is it to get puckered, because I've had that happen on me once or twice when I haven't pinned, so, and when I haven't been using my walking foot. So there you go. So I'll now put this back into the machine. And start where I finished, 1/4 of an inch, needle down, and just finish sewing this side to the quilt. Back stitch, and there we go. Look, lovely and neat. No puckers. How good is that? So what we're going to do now is we're going to take this to the pressing table, and I'm going to press that up all the way around, and then we're going to turn it over and press it down the other side. So we'll go and do that now. Right, so here we are at the pressing table. So now we've sewn on that border around the back, we now want to press it out. So just like that, try and get into the corners as well as you can. Work all the way around. Trim any threads off that you don't need. And then we'll turn the quilt over. And we're now going to press, make sure you can see, we're now going to press the binding over the top. And the reason I press this, it just helps to make the job easy when we're sewing it. So that's done. So back to the sewing machine. Right, so here we are back at the sewing machine after pressing our binding. I'd just like to say that I've actually added a label here. So if you did want to add a label, you need to do it, well, depends on yourself whether you want it on the back of the front, but I've actually undone my stitching and I've input that there. Right, so let's get this show on the road. So out come these great little clips again, and what I've done is I've changed the colour of my bobbin, because how I'm going to sew this, you're actually going to be able to see the stitching on that grey backing fabric. So I've changed the colour to grey, and I'll leave the black thread in the top. So I like to just use some of these clips just to make everything nice and tidy. Right, here we go. So I'm going to just move that up there. Right, so I'm not sure if you can see it here on camera, but there's my needle, and obviously there is a guide that I'll be following the edge of the binding, so that'll be my guide. But I actually want my stitching to be just above there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the foot down, and I'm actually going to move my needle across to that position there. Depending on your machine is whether you'll be able to do that. There you go. So I'm going to start stitching there. So I'll go forwards and back, or lock the stitches in to start. There we go. And I do have this stitch length on number 3, so I have lengthened that a little bit, and off we go. Just pin that out the way. That was what that pin was there for. So when you get to the edge, the corner here, I normally move those pieces of fabric, get my little embroidery scissors, and I'll clip that off to reduce the bulk, cut any threads. And then what you need to do here is fold the bottom piece of the binding there, and then try and create a really nice mitered corner this side. It can be a bit fiddly, but I like these to be perfect. That's not quite perfect for me. There you go. And I'll put a little clip there. So can you see that mitered corner that we've created there? So we'll stitch down to there, and then we can carry on doing along the bottom. You can pop a few clips in as you go. So I'm still following the edge of that binding there. I'll slow down. That's about it. Leave your needle in the down position. Turn your work. So I'll just stop here so that you can see, I think you can see on camera how neat that is across the top of the binding there, and on the back is that line of stitching there. So yeah, you can't really see it. That's a lovely, another nice mitered corner there. Finger press, and then bring a left over. Right, so there you have it. So we've finished it. How good's that? So what I'll do now is I will go and I'll just give this binding a press just so that it's nice and flat. I'll just show you, let me just cut that bit of the thread off there. So I'll just show you what the back of the mitre looks like. So that is a beautiful mitred corner, even though I say so myself. So when you see it on the reverse, see that little mitre there? Hope you can see that. So there's the mitre that we've created, and then on the reverse, nice little mitre there, really nice and neat. So I'll go and press the binding. I'll come back to you. So here's the completed quilt. I'm happy with that. Looks good on the back as well. So this will be really snuggly to watch the TV on a winter's night. If you do have any comments, please feel free to add comments and I will answer them. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and give me the thumbs up. That would be great. I hope you've learned something today. Be good to each other and I'll see you next time.